This is Season 1, Episode 26, and you are listening to an After Dinner Conversation magazine podcast. After Dinner Conversation believes humanity is improved by ethics and morals grounded in philosophical truth, and that truth is discovered through intentional reflection and respectful debate. In order to facilitate this process, we have created a growing series of print books, a monthly short story magazine, and 2 different podcasts. This podcast, Philosophy Ethics Short Story Audiobooks, provides audiobook readings of stories that have appeared in our magazine, and our companion podcast, Philosophy Ethics Short Story Discussions, is where we discuss the ethics of the choices made in the stories as a way to model the kinds of discussions we hope that you're having about these readings with friends, family, or students. We would love it if you would go over and check it out. I'm Colby, your narrator and the creator of After Dinner Conversation Publishing. Thank you for spending your time listening to our podcast and for reading the magazine. Thank you for supporting us through your magazine subscriptions and through patreon.com/After Dinner Conversation. And of course, if you enjoy this audiobook reading, please subscribe to our podcast, share it on social media, and suggest it to friends. Today's story is by Katherine Black, and it appeared in the April 2021 issue of our magazine, and it is titled, All Harriet's Pieces. Janie dropped the book into her lap and leaned her head against the outside of the translucent pig chamber. Warmth seeped from the chamber, a stark contrast to the cold atrium floor, covered with tiles Mama had found in some faraway place on one of her trips. Janie's wish to sink through the chamber wall to find a way inside was so familiar. It was almost comforting. Harriet stirred. Standing on her 4 short legs, she sidestepped until her pig body leaned lengthwise against the inside of the wall, facing Janie. Harriet used her eyes exactly like Mama's, to look at Janie in a way that Mama never did, never would. Her pig face tilted toward the book on Janie's lap, the one Janie had been reading aloud until a minute ago, the one about the pig and the spider who became friends. Janie was nearing the end of it. "I don't," Janie said. She held back the rest of her words. As much as she loved that book, she couldn't bear to face the end, not this time. Because the pig will survive in the book. Because real life is nothing like books. A chime played in the hallway, followed by a recording of Mama's voice. "Bedtime, child." Janie ignored Mama's schedule. She touched the chamber wall next to Harriet's pink floppy ear, wishing she could reach it. She'd always thought Harriet would enjoy a good scratch behind the ear. The chime continued, growing louder. Mama's digitized voice repeated every 3 seconds. "Bedtime, child." Harriet held Janie's gaze. Janie's chin quivered. After numerous bedtime calls rang through the atrium, Harriet plowed out of the bushes in the far corner of the chamber, trotting at a pace that seemed too fast for a pig. Stopped just inches from Janie on the other side of the wall, he stared at her with eyes identical to Janie's own. Normally, Janie would have snapped at Hardy. He was always nagging her, even if she couldn't hear him through the one-way comm. All she could muster tonight, though, was a single word. "Fine." The alarm stopped in response to her verbal acknowledgement. Hardy nodded, apparently satisfied. He walked over to Harriet and plopped down next to her for the night. Harriet closed her eyes as if this were just some regular evening like any other. Harriet deserved to know what was about to happen, but Janie didn't know how to tell someone they were going to die. Janie leaned into the comm on the chamber wall and said good night before standing and dragging her feet toward her wing of the house. She readied herself for bed, cleaned her teeth and her face, put on pajamas, thinking all the while about the pigs. To keep the day from ending, she decided to tidy up her library, returning books to their shelves. 23 books later, there was nothing else to do. She went to bed, twisting in her covers all night long until birds chirped outside the window, warning her of the coming sunrise. Sounds of movement echoed from somewhere in the house. Doors and voices. Too soon. Mama had promised Janie she could say goodbye before the procedure, but it wasn't even light out. Jumping out of bed, Janie made her way from her room to the service wing. Automatic lights sprung to life as she passed down the hall, but stopped when she entered the stairwell. She made her way in total darkness, conjuring a picture of Harriet's face in her mind, to ward off the monsters threatening to leap out of her imagination. No auto lights in the basement either. She crept toward the faint glow ahead, the space under the atrium under the pig chamber. She'd lost count of how many times she'd tried to break into the lift that led to the pig chamber, but something was different this time. Workers were here. Workers with codes and keys. Workers who wanted to take Harriet away. Crouched behind a corner, watching the Institute workers fiddle with buttons at the wall panel, Janie gauged the distance between the lift and the service door that opened to the grounds outside. She could get Harriet and run. Hardy, too. It could work, with a diversion. She surveyed tubes and pipes hanging down from the ceiling under the enclosure, looking for ones she could reach, ones that looked fragile. The commotion began quickly, panel lights blinking and people gathering around tubes. Barely able to avoid the glare of their flashlights, Janie slipped over to the lift. Her hand froze, poised over the only button with an arrow pointing up. Memories flooded, of all the times she'd pressed it before to no avail. She pushed again, jumping when the bell rang, looking back to the service people. They appeared not to hear it over the rush of air or gas escaping from the broken tubes. The door opened and she stepped outside. The air in the chamber was warm and a little wet. It smelled like a garden after a heavy storm. Her bare feet stepped onto the grass floor, soft and pokey at the same time. No pigs were in sight. She tried calling Harriet, but only a whisper came out. Hardy peeked from the bushes. Leaves shook around his face, around his wide eyes. Janie spoke fast. "Where's Harriet? We have to go, now." Hardy ran out from the bushes to stand in the middle of the chamber. "Hardy, where's Harriet?" Nodding his head toward the lift, Harriet let out a sound. It was the first sound Janie had ever heard from a pig. A whimper, but not unlike an animal, like a person. Janie shuddered. She walked over to Hardy. He was about the same size as her, but thicker and bent. Kneeling before him, Janie looked in Hardy's eyes. They were the same ones she saw in the mirror every day, but she could barely make them out right then, behind his tears. She hadn't realized that pigs could cry. Janie's head felt light, like a balloon. She let her rear hit the floor, and she sat, looking at Hardy's face as it fell out of focus. Hardy stepped forward and nudged Janie, rubbing his cheek against hers. It was soft. An alarm sounded around them. Oxygen levels low in pig chamber. Oxygen levels low in pig chamber. Barely able to keep her eyelids open, Janie finally gave in and let them drop. She woke up in her own bed. Her body felt like lead, like she held the gravity of the world upon her skin. The smell of the chamber still hung in her nose, the alarm blaring in the back of her thoughts. Harriet was already gone. It was time to accompany Mama to the Institute. She thought about staying in bed, maybe forever, but routine grabbed hold. She got up, showered, clothes, teeth, hair, until she stood at the threshold of her room unmoving. Mama's voice rang through the speakers in her bedroom. "Breakfast, child." Janie couldn't tell if it was Mama's real voice or the recorded one. Not that it mattered. Her legs responded to the call as always, walking her through the doorway and around two corners. All the while her mind panicked at the impending pass through the atrium, through her most favorite spot in the world. The pig chamber came into view. Only one pig stood on the other side of the wall, the exact age of Janie. With eyes identical to Janie's, lungs and kidneys and all sorts of innards exactly like Janie's, and with a heart that was breaking, just like Janie's. She slowed as she passed Hardy. He stood beside the comm, head bowed, eyes red. And then she broke into a run towards the kitchen. Chimes rang through the halls after her, Mama's recorded voice saying, "Please walk, child," over and over. Janie continued her fervent pace, "Please walk, child," until she finally reached the kitchen doorway. Mama sat at the breakfast table with her back to Janie, cradling a coffee mug in both hands. A sob broke free from Janie's throat. Mama's head cocked slightly to the side, but she did not turn. "Morning, child," she said. Janie held the familiar distance between herself and Mama. She wanted to plead, to drop to her knees on the hard tile floor and ask that Harriet be spared, but there was no use. Mama wouldn't give her morning coffee to a spare pig. She surely wouldn't give her life to a spare pig. As if she could read Janie's thoughts, Mama said, "Harriet wouldn't have existed if not for me." She sipped her coffee. "It was nice of you to entertain her until she was needed. You'll understand someday." She patted a hand on the table next to Janie's waiting breakfast. "Before it's cold," was all she said. Janie shuffled numbly to the kitchen table, soon after from the kitchen to the car, and finally from the car to the institute. Hours later she sat with Uncle Lou in the family waiting area. It was a large room. Several clusters of soft furnishings surrounded tables ready to play videos, games, or the daily news. A few families huddled in spots across the room. Uncle Lou watched some politics show. Janie watched the other families, wondering what they had said to their pigs last night, wondering if their pigs had known they were scheduled for murder this morning. "Jane?" A hand rested on her shoulder. She scooted across the sofa, away from her uncle. "I've watched you read to that pig since before you could actually read," he chuckled. "It was hilarious, listening to the stories you made up when you were little, while you turned pages on some huge book. You imagined some of the most bizarre stuff, but you said it all so very matter-of-fact-like, it made the craziness seem almost believable." Janie remembered how she used to drag a pillow and blanket into the atrium and sleep against the warm chamber wall, while the pigs curled against the inside of the translucent barrier, as close as her as they could get. "Jane, hun, I'm sorry you're losing a friend," he said. "But remember, you get to keep your mom. Without that spare heart inside her pig, your mom wouldn't have lived much longer." Janie kept quiet. Uncle Lou would not appreciate the words wanting to burst from her mouth. She studied the other kids sitting with their families, wondering which of them read stories to their pigs. Eventually, a man in a white coat walked into the waiting area and over to Uncle Lou and Janie to tell them news about the successful surgery. To inform them the rest of the spare organs were in excellent condition, in deep freeze right now there at the institute, waiting to be needed. Watching the man walk away and picturing Harriet pulled apart like a puzzle, Janie felt a tremor deep in her guts, like an earthquake that would never end. Janie and Hardy sat together in the atrium a week later, separated only by the translucent wall. Janie had no book in her hand, and Hardy's pig face held no expectant look. A voice called from the direction of Mama's wing. Uncle Lou was summoning her to Mama's lounge. "What took you so long?" Janie stood at the double-door entry. Mama reclined on her favorite chair, eyes closed. Janie could never tell when Mama was really sleeping. "Sorry. I need to run to the office, only for a little while," Uncle Lou said, pulling on his sport coat. "Keep your mom company while I'm gone." Janie didn't move. "Come on, you don't have to do too much. Just sit and hold her hand. The meds are keeping her quiet right now anyway." Uncle Lou winked at Janie. They both knew how grumpy Mama could get when she was disturbed. Like they'd so often done, Janie's legs responded to the adult command, while her mind protested. The cumulative effect was Janie walking awkwardly to the chair next to Mama and sitting down with an abrupt thud. Uncle Lou yelled as he headed to the door, "Call me if you need anything," and they were alone. Mama's head rested on the edge of the recliner. Janie brushed the tops of Mama's fingers before resting her hand lightly on top of Mama's. Mama's fingers were so cold. Janie wondered why they weren't blue. She thought that maybe cold skin only turns blue in books, but not in real life. Janie watched Mama's chest rise and fall with every breath, telling herself, "Harriet is in there," over and over. "Harriet is in there. Harriet is in there." Such a strange thought, knowing Harriet had been taken apart, dismantled, as the Institute called it, broken down like a Lego toy. Harriet's heart went into Mama, and the rest of Harriet's Mama parts went into some deep freezer. Eyes, lungs, kidneys, brain, and Janie wasn't even sure what other stuff. We're the lucky ones getting a pig when we're born, Mama had said so often when passing Janie in the atrium, reading to Harriet and Hardy. You know, most people in this world can't afford their own pig. Janie's teeth gritted. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Her hand pressed Mama's cold fingers hard, then harder. Janie didn't care about cancers and diseases and defective organs, and she would surely never care about those things. She only cared about Harriet. She would run to the Institute and break into the freezers and gather up all the pieces of Harriet, even tear the heart right out of Mama if she only knew how to put them all together and make Harriet whole again. But she was old enough to know that wouldn't work in real life. Real life was sickness and disease and murdered pigs. If only Mama had a bunch of diseases, then all of Harriet's pieces could be almost put back together again, inside Mama. If only Mama needed a new brain, then Harriet's brain could become Mama's. They only take pieces of the brain, Mama said once. The more pieces of Harriet, the better. Janie stilled, looking at Mama as if she could see inside of her, counting Mama's parts. Mama twitched and slowly opened her eyes. She moaned, "Child, I need a pill." Janie removed her hand from atop Mama's and straightened her back. She sat quietly watching, thinking. A few moments passed before Mama stirred again. "Child," she said louder, "my pills." A calm washed over Janie. "Yes, Mama," she said. "Which pill do you need?" Mama smacked her lips. "I don't know, child. Call Lou. He'll tell you." She fell into deep breathing again. Janie sat for several minutes, her mind calculating, and then she left the room. She returned to the lounge with her arms full, walking through the doorway without hesitation. She pressed on Mama's arm. "Mama, wake up. You said you needed pills." Mama attempted to open her eyes several times before she was successful. She focused on Janie's outstretched hand, cradling several colorful pills. "Are you sure these are the right ones?" Janie lifted them to Mama's mouth. "Yes, Mama, I'm absolutely sure." Mama took the pills with some effort and drank water before laying down back in the recliner. Janie laid one of her bedroom pillows against the back of her own chair, puffing it up before she settled into the seat next to Mama and opened a book. She began reading out loud. Mama's eyelids grew heavy, almost closing, until suddenly they opened wide. She turned her head with effort to stare at her daughter, who was already on page 2 of her favorite story. The end. Discussion questions. Number 1. Why do you think the family kept their donor pig in a place they could see and access it? Is this about respect, foolishness, or something else? Question number 2. Assuming this organ donation technology was possible, do you support the idea of an organ donor pig? Would you personally take a life-saving organ from a donor pig? What if the donor animal were a higher or lower order animal? What are your animal intelligence limits for organ donation, i.e. a rat versus a gorilla? Question number 3. If the value of life is on a sliding scale, why is it that we as humans get to judge the criteria by which other animals are judged? Wouldn't our scale be inherently biased towards humans? Question 4. Would you accept a donor organ from a clone or twin that was kept in a coma its entire life? Question 5. Do you think the little girl meant to kill her mother? If so, why? If you enjoyed this story, head over to our companion podcast, After Dinner Conversation Discussions, and listen to our discussion of this or other short stories from our magazine. We'll include a link in the description. And of course, you can always continue the discussion on our webpage, in the comments section, or on our Facebook page. Join us next week for the story Ruddy Apes and Cannibals. Have a wonderful day. Bye.